Welcome to the Capstone Conversation, the East Bay's best podcast. Hosted by Jared Asch, bringing you in-depth conversations with the leaders shaping your community.
Today's episode of the Capstone Conversation is going to focus on an economic development blueprint for here in the greater East Bay and how people can take action, but we're going to back it up with facts from an economist. So I am joined today by Dr. Chris Thornberg of Beacon Economics. Thanks, Chris, for joining me.
It's great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, the company, and just how you approach economic development.
It's a good question. First of all, I'm not a developer. I'm an economist, which means I play a developer on TV, if you will. But that said, I have been out of academia and in the private sector for 20 years now. I have a company called Beacon Economics. We're based down here in LA. I will tell you, go back even pre-Beacon. I was working for UCLA and in the UCLA forecast, and one of the first contracts they gave me back in the day was this contract with this little group called the EDAB back in the day, which was the East Bay Economic Development Alliance. East Bay, now it's called East Bay EDA. It used to be called the Development Alliance for Business. That's what it was. It was business in the title, and Bruce Kern was running it. Bruce is still around the state. He's one of our gurus in the development world. Very early on, I learned quite a bit about the East Bay, and I've had the privilege of being up there on a fairly regular basis, talking about the economy nationally, state-wise, but also, of course, what's happened right there in the two counties.
When we were talking before we hit record, you mentioned that the East Bay has become stagnant or is losing population, losing jobs. We're missing a golden opportunity of who we are and what our natural resources are.
You're supposed to work into it.
And that's a good opening, though. We should be doing more.
We should be doing more. That's exactly right. And look, it's not obviously just the East Bay. It's the entire Bay Area that, from a surface level, it's stagnant, right? Labor force has declined in the last 6 or 7 years. Payroll jobs are basically flatline. In the East Bay, they're down in San Francisco. They're up a little bit in San Jose from prior to the pandemic. They're struggling because they're not seeing economic growth. They're not seeing revenue growth. That said, the cost of roads keeps going up. The cost of police keep going up. The cost of the basics of what cities and counties need to do keeps going up. And the belt's getting tighter and tighter. It's frustrating, but when you look closely, you very quickly begin to realize that these problems are not, if you will, chronic. It's not some cross the region has to bear. Rather, it's the fact that they've allowed a lack of focus on economic development issues, a focus that has been captured by these social justice issues where most of the focus is. And as a result of that, some of the very simple changes that need to occur in the region aren't happening. And it's that lack of forward progress in terms of making decisions about important growth policies that are needed that are holding the region back. Look, the Bay Area was in a particular kind of place in the early years of the pandemic. 2021, things were about rock bottom. And we all know the headlines and when Elon Musk was calling San Francisco a post-apocalyptic hell. And it was hard to argue with him with smash and grabs going on and the kind of chaos with homelessness. But that happens in economies. Things cycle. And what's interesting is, at least in the West Bay, you're really starting to see a change in attitude, a change in what people are paying attention to. We know about Mayor Lowry in San Francisco and the things he's putting into place. And now San Francisco, after some bunch of rough years, is really starting to shine again. Mayor Mahan in San Jose has done a fantastic job managing that city's particular issues. While the job situation is still flat over there, there's a pile of new venture capital going into the region. They are the center of a lot of the stuff in AI, a ton of new money being made over there. And that, if you will, new attitude, from my perspective, hasn't gotten to the East Bay yet. There was a glory moment. I remember when I first started working up there, prior to the Great Recession, and it was a region that was boom. A lot of housing was going on. They felt a lot of that strength. Obviously, the East Bay got hammered by what happened in housing during the Great Recession. A lot of problems there. But that said, that's those cyclical problems. They weren't structural problems. In fact, I watched Jerry Brown come in. He was mayor of Oakland. You really started to see the region come into its own after the Great Recession in a way I don't think anybody really anticipated. But that really started petering out a few years ago, as already noted. Again, focus was lost. The right decisions aren't being made. In fact, a lot of cases, the wrong decisions are being made. And waiting for local sort of development leaders to start focusing on changing the things to take advantage of the region's potential.
Let's back up and focus on this potential for a good portion of the conversation.
Yeah.
You talked about historically, we've had a drop off post COVID.
In terms of the number of jobs, right? There's no doubt about that. And that's estimates of what we know about the empty office space, and we know about the flat taxable sales. But these are all measures of what we call growth on the extensive margin. That is to say, how big is the overall pie getting, so to speak? But there's a whole other way of looking at what's going on, which is not as much focus, if you will, on the number of jobs, but rather how well off people are doing. And on that front, well, look, I'm sorry, but the Bay Area remains one of the richest, wealthiest places in the nation, bar none. Look, in the top, like, of the 3,000 plus counties in the United States, in the top 100 are 11 California counties, okay? And of those 11 California counties, Contra Costa, Alameda, San Francisco, Santa Clara, and Marin County are all up there in some of the richest counties in the nation. These are median numbers I'm basing it on. You take that person in the 50th percentile, and that 50th percentile person is making a hell of a lot more money than almost anywhere else in this nation.
Let's build on
And those numbers are going up.
Okay, so we're making more money than elsewhere in the nation. People think the cost of living here is so expensive. How does that compare to that income number?
I just had this conversation. Again, one of my clients and I just adore working with him, is a Contra Costa Board of Supervisors up there earlier this week. You can go to the county website, you'll find my presentation, and I have this data. Because we don't have to guess at the cost of living. The Bureau of Economic Analysis has a wonderful data series called the Regional Price Parities, which more or less says if you were going to move from your average American place into the Bay Area, how much more money do I need to make to keep approximately the same quality of life? And the answer is 20%. That's the answer. A little over 20, 21%. Median incomes in their area are like 45% higher than the national average. So even if you account for the cost of living, the folks there have a higher quality of life than most of the rest of the United States. Now, I know, by the way, I know you're going to say, hey, that's not possible. Housing is outrageously expensive here. And that's true. In economics, there's a thing called the relative price effect, which says if housing is expensive, you consume proportionally less housing and more of everything else. And that's the same reason we have to use chain link price indices, which is getting way too deep into the weeds for this conversation. But this is a known effect. This is how you deal, and these RPPs account for that, right? So no, you're not going. If you're going to live in Indianapolis, you're probably going to have a 5-bedroom house on 3/4 of an acre, because everybody in Indianapolis has a 5-acre house, 5-bedroom house with a half an acre of land. You don't do that in the Bay Area. There's not enough space. Again, smaller homes, less housing consumed, but walkable cities, some of the best views on the planet, some of the most insane restaurants around. So what? What an unbelievable place to live. And the people living there are living the dreams.
So what I'm hearing is all the people who leave California for Texas and Arizona and wherever else they're going, they're getting like a bigger physical house, but their incomes also might drop. And
Your incomes drop. You leave the state, your income is not going to be what you're making here in California. Absolutely not. And yes, you'll have a bigger house, but guess what? Cars are going to cost the same. The stuff on Amazon is going to cost the same. You go to Costco, you're going to pay the same prices. All that's going to be the same. The people who are fleeing, you'd see two things. You'd see housing vacancy going up and home prices coming down. And that's not happening. Vacancies are as tight as ever. Home prices continue to be some of the highest in the nation. And understand the price mechanism, what we're talking about here, that price mechanism is the pressure cap. And that's what this all boils down to. If things are so good, if it's such a nice place to live, why isn't everybody moving there? And the answer is because they've made it impossible for anybody to move there. Look, we understand the problem here is a lack of housing construction. If you don't build it, they can't live in it. People are doing so well there. That's creating a lot of internal demand for housing just because people are spreading out. People don't have roommates anymore. You don't live with your parents. And the result of that is you have a big decline of people per household. And that spreading out is bidding up prices higher because it's a fixed housing stock. And those high prices are the signal to tell certain people that as much as you would like to stay here, you can't. There's not enough housing. Someone has to flinch. And it's typically lower income families with kids, people who are housing price sensitive. And that's the point here. The way to help working class families is to build housing. Period.
If we build housing, will people fill it
Absolutely.
at whatever price? Or
No, that's the banana. Prices come from market equilibriums. You don't announce a price. Look, you know where apartment rents are falling right now? Phoenix, Nashville, Tennessee, Jacksonville. You know why? Because I built too much. If you really don't like building developers, if you really don't like housing developers, teach them a lesson. Lots of stuff get built. That'll teach them, right? You build. That's how you bring prices down. Simple as that. Now, a lot of builders tell you, I can't build here. Why? It's because of the fees, the costs, the taxes, the insane complexity of dealing with a permitting system. Yes. But again, those are all choices. We don't have to have all these fees on new permits. We don't have to make zoning so complicated. We can do by right zoning so that you don't have to deal with the mad scrub of public testimony and planning boards and all that kind of stuff. The cities that want to do it, and it can be done. When Jerry Brown got to Oakland, he said, I want 10,000 more housing units. And everybody said, no way. And he said, yeah. And he went down and he streamlined the bureaucracies. And he told them to get the hell out of the way. And he told them that the first answer should be yes. And an amazing amount of housing was built in Oakland. It brought life back to that city. And then as soon as he left, they turned that off and it's going right back to where it was.
the cities who say, hey, we actually do want more housing, we want to hit our numbers, but we can't get the private developers to come in here.
Not at your price points, not with your regulatory regime, not with what, if you let somebody buy 20 acres of land for development, then you immediately turn around and tell them you got to devote half of that to public open space. No wonder they're not going to buy the land and build there. Look, you can build here. I know. You know why? Because they build in Texas. And it's the same wood. It's the same construction people. It's the same plan, the same technology. There's nothing inherently easier about building in Texas than here.
The argument that it has to do with the interest rates and the cost of the materials and the labor.
Again, we could do it here.
Okay, let's now look at that past housing, because you're talking about building and growth. And when we were talking earlier, one of the biggest problems for economic development in the Bay Area is for a long time it hasn't grown, that these cities haven't done large scale economic development. Talk a little bit about that, both with some facts, but then move it forward.
I got 4 words for you that tells us everything we need to know. Concord Weapons, Naval Weapons Station. Concord, that military base that has been empty for 20 years, 30 years, empty. I drove by it the other day on the way up to Antioch to do the talk, and it's beautiful. What a hunk of land. Beautiful valley, surrounded by beautiful hills, right on a major highway, right on BART. You could put an Irvine-like development in there for 80,000 people without even like, why not? And the answer is because deep down inside, we don't want growth. And that's the thing here. I hear way too many of our elected leaders, more on the state level than the local level, but many of the state leaders, whenever I hear them talk, they immediately start talking about all the hard work they're doing to bring more housing supply to California. And then nothing happens. And it's always confusing to me. So you're all doing so much work to make this happen. Why isn't it happening? And the answer is because they know they need to say that out loud. But they also know that if they actually made it easier to build, their constituents would be howling for their blood. It's the NIMBYs that have locked this conversation down. Look at the CEQA reform we had a few months ago, because when you looked at that closely, there's a few reliefs, and it was good. Those reliefs were well needed. How many poison pills they packed into that thing?
Was talking to someone yesterday that said there are environmental and labor groups that are now coming back and trying to withdraw some of that.
Exactly, because it was a mess, and we're our own worst enemy over and over again. And you don't know. Again, why aren't we paying better attention to this? Why don't we have a better sense of things? Why aren't we more focused on leading into growth? It's one of these little mysteries. And some of it, maybe the people don't see the personal advantage. I'll give you a little side story. It's a different place, but it's so apropos. We did a study recently for City of Paso Robles, because a lot of people live in the city of Paso Robles, which is a gorgeous city, North San Luis Obispo County, absolutely wonderful place. But they're sick to death of the tourists, of all these people coming in and ruining their summer days by filling up the restaurants. And they were trying to pass rules to prevent these people from coming. Now, this is the center of wine country. And so what we did is we sat down and we did an impact study, and we pointed out not just how much money that city was making from those annoying people driving around the city, but then what that money was being used for, the playgrounds that were being built, the roads that were being repaved.
Hi, I am Ed Delvacaro for TRI Commercial Real Estate Services. We serve clients who are providing commercial real estate brokerage and consulting services in medical, office, retail, industrial, and multifamily. We also perform consulting services for economic development studies, brokers' opinions of value, and commercial real estate feasibility studies. We specifically do economic development studies to help cities identify the economic drivers, how to generate activity to attract businesses in downtown and retailers. And some of the work we have done is for the cities of Walnut Creek, Hayward, Antioch, Concord, Martinez, Benicia, and Laguna Beach, amongst others. For more information, go to tricommercial.com. By the way, some of these studies I've done with Jared Asch of Capstone.
There is. They just opened their first Michelin star restaurant in Paso Robles.
And that's for tourists, not for the locals.
But the locals get to go there. And by the way, when it's a low season, yeah, the restaurant's going to give you a discount because you'll live there. Just like Disneyland does. So when you sit down and you get people to recognize how much their life is improved, maybe you can move the needle, maybe a little.
Let's talk about economic development from a city's perspective, because there are a number of cities that have structural deficit problems, and I think it's going to continue to grow long term. If you're doing a report for a city and you're looking at economic development, what are you seeing as where do cities fail, right?
It's because they have this incredibly short-term view of things. You say, I have a budget problem. I want hotels and retail. And the answer is there's already too many hotels, which there are. There's been a 25% increase in hotels in the state over the last decade. The population hasn't grown that much. And I know you probably haven't heard that, but it's true. And of course, retail, look, it doesn't matter how fast you build retail. It's going down the hill to Tracy. Figure it out. Is not by changing your businesses, but by changing the pattern of consumers. How do you revitalize downtowns? The answer is apartment buildings. The kind of retail that's succeeding is the walkable retail, the convenience retail, the stuff that's by people's houses. You want to make your downtown shine, start building apartments and condos around it. It brings in people, those people become customers, and that drives the local ecosystem, which can come back and earn you more money in the long run.
An example of that's good is I was recently had the mayor of San Leandro on the podcast in early January, and he was talking about this part of their master plan. They realized they need to almost double the size of the population of that city, make it walkable by being a pro housing community and reinvigorating some dead spaces. Like the Bayfair Mall is a great example. They're bringing in entrepreneurs and startup hubs and working with the developer there. They're okay letting the retail go because it's creating jobs through other means. Then the people could live in these units and shop and dine and more. Sounds like that's what you're talking about.
Although you went to the next step, you jumped in front of me, which is fine, because everything I've been talking about is people and housing. There is a lot of advantage to that, but there's another disadvantage. And the disadvantage, of course, is if you're building housing and bringing in people, particularly if it's nice housing and higher income folks, which you can certainly well attract, they may well end up working in San Francisco or San Jose. You're not only have a shortage of housing, but the housing you have, you're competing with the West Bay because the West Bay's, if you will, jobs economy is much stronger. The East Bay's historic job base was in heavy industry, heavy manufacturing, refineries, food production. Those have whittled away. They've gone down the hill. They're starting to disappear. And then a result of that is the area has become a bedroom community for the West Bay, particularly Contra Costa, and some parts of Alameda, obviously. In Oakland, of course, it's a story in its own right. The other thing to be thinking about is, okay, if we're going to have housing, we want people to work here. We don't want them to have to go across that bridge every day. So what do we do? And the answer is you start making jobs. And yet again, how do you do that? Go back to that Concord weapons station. Because part of that could be a light manufacturing tech hub. You can go up to the North Shore. The North Shore of Contra Costa County is unbelievably strong at this particular point, has a particularly strong potential. It's dead. But that used to be all heavy industry there. You got access to waterfront, some of the most beautiful land, incredible opportunity again for mixed use, new kind of economy kind of stuff. How do you do that? How do you attract jobs? How do you make things work? And go to Fremont. How fast does Fremont issue a permit? How easy is it in Fremont to do what you need to do to make an investment? It's one of the only cities in the Bay Area that truly will say, hey, yeah, we're here. We're going to get done in a reasonable amount of time. Now, even they struggle with the 2-year connection through PG&E, but again, that's a different kind of issue. But again, over and over again, you have the examples in front of you. What can the rest of the East Bay take away from that? And again, let's develop the Concord weapons station. Let's figure out a real plan for that North Shore. And what's interesting here is if they don't get in front of it now, I could see Contra Costa ending up being a bedroom community in 2 directions in 30 years. Because we all know what's happening on the other side of the river. And that's, of course, this California Forever, a massive plan for a whole new city on the other side, big visions. It's getting kind of controversial. I get that. I saw a really interesting presentation on that. And the guy who's spearheading the whole thing points out that area was actually at one point in time slated to be a city. Back in the day, in the 50s, when they were laying out California, that was not supposed to be grazeland. That was actually supposed to be part of the urban area. It just never happened.
I'm hearing a lot in creating the jobs is really starting for cities at embracing the housing side of the equation.
Let me put it differently. The inherent reaction in California to anything that looks like a problem is to create more regulations, create more subsidies, create more rules, create more whatever, exemptions. When what we really need to do is realize that good governance can come from going the other direction. What government really needs to do is get out of the way. California has had an incredibly successful industrial past. Some of the greatest inventions, some of the greatest minds have made this place home, have built their companies here. This region, this state oozes with potential. The question isn't how do we create the potential? It's there. It's how do we allow us to use that potential? And that's getting out of the way.
It's You're talking streamlined permitting, streamlined fees for housing, but also business.
Yes.
Make it easy for them.
Make it easy. There seems to be this weird idea that government has to be involved with how the economy grows. And while I appreciate we all don't want a cyanide producer opening up shop next to our house, I get that. For the most part, our rules and regulations have become, at best, excessive.
What types of business do you see ripe for growth here in at least the East Bay area of the Bay Area? What types of businesses should cities be looking at bringing into the equation here?
Manufacturing is obviously one of them. Now, I want to be clear when I say the word manufacturing, I'm not necessarily thinking of manufacturing necessarily as a big job creator, because modern manufacturing, the kind of light, high-tech manufacturing, the nimble stuff that can compete in a global economy, they're using computers, they're using robotics, they're using machines, and they're using some very high-end workers, right, to operate that. But you got to have the space, they got to have the power, they got to have the freedom to do the things they're going to do. That's a great way of pumping money into the economy. But when you pump that money into the economy because of the magic of the multiplier effect, that obviously creates space for most everything else, right? But absolutely that kind of thing. Particularly there's the Bay Area, for God's sake. A lot of these jobs are going right past the Bay Area into Sacramento or worse, into Nevada. Again, bring those guys here, bring it back to by the big universities, that kind of stuff.
We've talked about streamlining. We've talked about faster approvals, less fees. What are other ways, though, we could bring in some of these companies and some of those businesses in manufacturing?
You're going to have some hard conversations about air quality rules and how crazy some of these air quality districts can be, right? That's a big problem. Your PG&E has got to be discussed. 2 years for a hookup is not correct. Now, the new CEO over there seems great. I know she's trying. That's the other thing, right? Now more than ever. Think about those refineries. I remember last year when they were announcing the closure refineries, and it was such a weird thing. You'd think people in the East Bay would be thrilled, but suddenly everybody was panicked about that as well. No matter what happens, people are panicking.
They realize the refinery is 20 to 30% of their income.
It's not.
Okay.
Yes, it does pay some business taxes. That's not going to be there when they finally close the thing down. But the reality is most of the supply chain involved in those refineries have long since moved downhill. They're not in the East Bay anymore. They hire guys out of Stockton to come up and do the stuff they need to do. They don't hire a lot of people. There's 1,000 people working there. Come on, how big is the East Bay? I don't have a million people, over a million, a million, two, whatever. But lots of
close
people.
to 4 million.
A significant source of employment. That's not the issue. What is the issue is you have an enormous hunk of industrial land sitting on an active, navigable waterway with a huge amount of power supply. If that doesn't scream opportunity to you, what does? So, look, I understand that there are glorious parts of our natural environment we want to maintain. And I look at that mountain behind you on your background, and I understand that. I'm not telling you to put houses on top of that thing. But there's a lot of flat green stuff around the bottom of that thing. And infill, using that space. You want to see a master's class in development? Go to Vancouver. Vancouver, Canada is a master's class. High density housing, walkable neighborhoods, lots and lots of condos, and a stunning natural environment. You can get out of that town in 45 minutes and be in the middle of nowhere. An hour. We can have that too, but that means you've got to build some high rises. Yeah, some of these single family neighborhoods are going to go. Change happens.
What are some other key economic data, things that you want us to be aware of that will help build a future in the East Bay?
Big question. And I want to, look, again, I go back to the idea here. There is two kinds of focus. One is on helping the overall economy grow. And there's the other focus, which is on inequality and the plight of lower income families. If you care about the size of the pie, you don't care about the little people, right? If you talk about growth, it means you're insensitive. If you really want to know what helps families, the answer is job opportunities. The answer is skill training and the potential to get a career. That's the greatest lift of all. A strong economy is great for people. And we focus so much on minimum wages and housing supports, but that's where you really start to tackle some of these tough social issues we faced over the years.
What do you see as opportunities for these secondary airports around the Bay Area?
Well, we all know about the aerospace revolution going on, whether we're talking about drones and drone delivery, helicopter taxis, and all that kind of stuff. The air is the next great frontier at some level, and obviously all those spaces lend themselves to that kind of economic growth, as the case may be. That said, there's also an argument to be made that we have a lot of airports. And some of those airports are big hunks of land that can go back to that mixed use planned community drop zone, but you're going to want to do it. Santa Monica finally got around to closing their airport. And again, having an airport in Santa Monica was and continues to be one of the most preposterously obnoxious rich person thing I've ever heard in my entire life. But you know what? They're going to make it into a park, not housing, not a business park, not an economic development zone. So they're doing the right thing and they're immediately following it up with the wrong thing.
What about the power of working regionally? Pleasanton, Livermore, Dublin working together, but a lot of the rest of the East Bay does it on their own, competing over some of the same businesses. How does that impact economic development and growth?
There's actually a theory in economics that a little public policy competition can go a long way. My argument would be let the cities have their freedom, let them fight, let them compete, but then really allow them to do that. Let the cities who have that pro-growth mantra run with it and help them do better. How can the state get regions to build enough housing? And the inherent inclination of the state is always to whip cities into account through these RHNA standards. And it's failed miserably. It doesn't work. You can't let them get away with nonsense. But pain is not a good long-run motivation. So the argument here is, why don't we create positive incentives? I like to say that as opposed to this distributing taxable sales by where people buy stuff, why don't we distribute taxable sales on where people live? And then the cities that grow the most population will get the biggest increases in their budgets. That would incentivize cities to want housing. They want retail because they get taxable sales. We give them very few tools to make money off of non-retail businesses. Why aren't we doing that? There are ways, I think, of promoting local competition rather than preventing it. But that said, these cities have to have the tools and the incentives to want to compete. And that's the rub.
How do people learn more about you and the work you're doing at Beacon Economics?
Yeah. Oh, beaconecon.com. Yeah, simple as that. So beaconecon.com. We're there. Or you can look me up, Chris Thornberg. I have a feeling more than one of your watchers probably have seen me someplace in the East Bay over the last 45 years or so. I live here in LA, but my years of working with development organizations up there, leadership groups up there, many of the governments up there, I have a deep love for the East Bay, and it has such potential. And I just want to see the place succeed.
I heard you speak, I think it was in November here in Contra Costa at a conference, and you busted some myths about economic development.
So true.
Can you just name a few key stats off your head? What are some things you want to dispel out there before we let you go?
Narratives versus reality kind of thing. Like, again, we live in a time of abundance. Here, let me encapsulate everything I've just told you. The biggest problem we have, again, is our narratives. We have this weird idea that we're falling behind, that families are struggling like crazy, when any objective look at the data says, actually, things are great. And while they can always be better, and there are people we can and should help, the reality is that we're not in crisis mode. Quality of life in the Bay Area is as good as it's ever been. And the way to continue to improve their quality of life is to make room for economic and demographic growth. That's what you need to take away from this. That means changing the narrative in city halls, changing the narrative in the newspapers. That means everybody taking a step back and recognizing the fact that we live, appreciate just how amazing it is, and make the most of it.
Find a place that's going through winter right now, and here it's 66 degrees, and enjoy it.
I just came back from Michigan, and it was chilly. Beautiful place in the summer, but it was cold in February.
We all live here for a reason, and let's help our communities grow and be the best that they can. Dr. Chris Thornberg from Beacon Economics.
Great to be with you.
Thanks for listening to the Capstone Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe and follow Jared Asch and Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Leave us a review and share this episode with a friend.